Okay, this is our last chapter for our first unit. So today we are specifically talking about people in geography. So, one thing that we look at when we are studying people is their culture. So, with every region of the world, people have a unique culture. Even looking here where we live in South Dakota, we have a couple cultures combining together. So think about it for a second. What do you think are the different cultures in our area? So one should be fairly easy, fairly widespread, and we can say that we have an American culture. We can also say, because we live kind of in the Midwest, we definitely have a strong Midwestern culture, and you can think about how to define that, and we'll probably use that as an example as we go along here. And then lastly, we have Native American culture in our area, which is very different from our Midwestern culture. And they do combine together to make a unique culture of its own. So, with culture, I'm sure you've all heard that word before, used in different contexts. But the way that we are going to define culture today is the way of a life of a group of people who share similar ways of thinking, believing, and living. Specifically, we are going to look at language, religion, daily life, history, art, government, technology, and their economy. And we're going to kind of group all these different types of people together because they have similarities within these little parts here. So what we're going to do in this lesson is take each one of those parts and break it down so that we can understand what it really means. So that when we go to these different regions of the world, we can say, oh, like, I know that their language is part of their culture, and that's going to help kind of make people act a certain way, or it just adds to the way that they live their lives. So, starting with language, very simply, it is how we communicate, it's how we talk to each other, and we use language to pass on our values, tradition, and knowledge. Some cultures have a lot of like oral communication, oral language, where they verbally speak things and they don't write it down. So your knowledge, traditions, all of that is passed down through word of mouth. And other cultures will write things down and have a record of what happened. We can also have a language that is found in different areas, but it's just a little bit different from each other. So we call that a dialect. So people are speaking the same language, but they might use different words that are specific to the region that they live in. So for example, we in our region, we would call a shopping cart, obviously, but in some southern states, they call it a buggy. Or we would call it a water fountain, but people in Wisconsin may call it a bubbler. When I was in high school, I went to Washington, D.C., and I remember going to a McDonald's there, and they asked me what kind of Coke I wanted, and I said Coke. So they don't call pop or soda pop or soda, they call it Coke. Everything is Coke. Um, so that's really interesting. Another really good example would be American English versus British English. And then even Australian English. So if you were to go to London, or if you were going somewhere in Australia, you would be able to understand the people there, but they might use different words for different things. So in England or Britain, they might call the bathroom the loo, or they, instead of calling it the trunk of their car, they'll call it the boot. Cookies are something different. Chips are something different there. So it really just, you can understand them for the most part, but they might just have something slightly different between the languages. And then this is a whole study on its own. We won't really get into this, but languages can trace kind of almost like a family tree. They can trace their roots back to a bigger family group. And this means that languages have similarities. So if we were to look at Italian and Spanish and maybe Portuguese, they can all be traced back to Latin. So they all kind of came or developed from Latin. That would have been the original language for a lot of people, and then it develops over time. So all the languages in the world can trace their roots back to one specific language. And that's why they say when you're learning a language, sometimes it's easy, once you learn Spanish, then it'd be really easy for you to learn Italian, because a lot of the words are the same. Okay. And then religion is another big one. There are lots of religions around the world. People believe different things, but religion really came about because as humans, we feel the need to explain our existence, why we are on this earth. We like to give credit to a higher being than us that kind of controls things. And because we have such different religious beliefs, and usually whatever we believe, we are very strong about it, like we won't take no for an answer. There's been a lot of fighting. When we get to the Middle East, we'll talk about a lot of that, a lot of wars just fought because of religion. Religion might also help us understand what our morals are, the difference between right and wrong. There might be different practices or traditions. So in Islam, they have a holiday that's roughly a month long. It's usually in April or May called Ramadan, and they cannot eat during the day. They have to fast. And then different holidays. So Christians not practice, but they celebrate Christmas, but Jews celebrate Hanukkah instead. And religion is known to influence art, literature, architecture, and music. And then we also look at social groups. So if you take sociology with me, we really hit on this. But basically, where we live, we have our own society, and within our society, we have different groups of people. So we all have a common characteristic that we share that puts us in this group. And you're going to belong to multiple groups. So you are in the same group as all teenagers. If you are extremely wealthy, you're in one group. If you're poor, you're in another group. Your education level can put you in a group. Your gender can put you in a group. We do this because we like to organize ourselves, and it helps us understand the world a little bit better. So then we also have ethnic groups. So hopefully you hear the word ethnicity a lot, and we'll talk about lots of ethnic groups. But this is a specific group of people living in a country, and they have a common language, a common history, a common place of origin, a common religion. All of these things work together to kind of separate them and group them off. And then we also see a lot of fighting between ethnic groups because of those differences. So an example would be the Lakota people. They are a specific ethnic group. You can also say your ethnicity. So my ancestors mainly came from Germany, so I am ethnically German. I might not live in Germany, but that's where my ancestors came from. So at one point, my ancestors would belong to German as an ethnic group. And then government, we will get into this later, but there are different forms of governments, different types of governments, and government is actually really, really important because it allows us to agree on some common things and agree on how our society should be ran. Governments can also maintain order, so if there are protests or riots, the government's going to come in and make sure that everything is done safely. They might provide protection from outside enemies. They can supply services to their people. We also, in the US, we have 3 different levels of government. We have our local or city government, our state government, and our national government. And some countries might have a single ruler, so maybe just a king, maybe just a dictator. They might have a small group of rulers. This is called an oligarchy. We generally don't see a lot of those anymore, but an example would be ancient Rome. And we could have a body of citizens with representatives, and that's what we have. We have a representative democracy. And a democracy is just where the people get to rule and the people get to decide. And very similar to government is economics. So the government kind of decides what resources we have and how we are going to use them, who gets to own them, what they make from those resources, if the government has a lot of control of that, or if they leave it up to the people. We also know that people have different jobs, they provide different services, they might farm, or they might be a part of a bigger industry, which is generally like factories and making items. And economics is really just looking at how a country might use the natural resources they have to meet their needs. So how do we build our houses? What do we build them from? And who is going to do the building? And overall, economics will show us how we produce or make, how we obtain or get, how we use, and how we use the goods and services at our disposal. So, after we finish this unit, we are then going to talk about different regions. So we will go to each region of the world that's on this map here, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each of those. So we split these regions up based on a few things. We are going to look at their culture. So if we look at this region here, it's made up of the US and Canada, but not Mexico. So we might be on the same continent, but we are culturally different from people who live in Mexico, that it wouldn't make sense to put us in a region together, even though we're right next to each other. We are fairly similar to Canada, though. So if you look at the US and Canada, we both speak English. Canadians also speak French Canadian. A lot of people have the same religion, which is Christianity. We have the same rough structure of government, same economics, we eat the same foods, just a lot of similarities there. So by doing this, it'll help us understand how the cultures have developed over time, how they influence each other, and just looking at individual countries, and we can get a general idea of what it is like there based off of culture. So another really important thing we can look at is how different cultures spread and influence other cultures. We call this cultural diffusion. Maybe in a science class you talked about diffusion. So if you were to put a drop of red food dye in a glass, you could watch the food dye kind of diffuse or disperse throughout the water. So this is the same idea. So you have one culture with a really great idea, and they are going to spread that knowledge to another culture. There are many examples of this, and next year when you take world history, you're going to focus a lot on this. So we have the agriculture revolution, where one group of people, one culture, discovered agriculture. They discovered how to farm, and that idea spread across the world eventually. The Industrial Revolution was pretty much factories popping up everywhere. So it started in England and then it spread throughout the world. Information revolution is basically having computers and internet, that sort of thing, and how it's easy for us to get information. And there's computers everywhere on Earth now. So this helps us see how cultures change and have developed over time, who has the most contact with who. It is increasing even more. So within the last 250 years, travel has become a lot easier and we are more connected to other cultures globally than we were ever before. And I think a really good example of cultural diffusion is McDonald's. This is an American restaurant, but now you can find a McDonald's in almost every country in the world. Same with Subway, started in the US, and now Subway is the most popular restaurant in the world. So things start in one area and then they spread throughout to others. And one really important thing is the Industrial Revolution. So this is basically making factories. We're industrializing things instead of making things at home, like dresses and loaves of bread. We can now make those in factories, which allows it to be done a lot faster and for a lot cheaper. So people were able to leave the farms where they were just barely scraping by, move to cities and start working in factories, and they started making a little bit more money, stopped having as many kids, and cities were able to grow rapidly, and that's kind of pushed us into the world that we have today. And the information revolution, because we have computers, we have access to the internet, and we are able to learn about other cultures just with the click of a button. So ideas, traditions are going to spread a lot faster. A really great example is TikTok and trends. So one person does something, posts it on TikTok, and then pretty soon everyone across the US or across the world can watch that video and partake in that trend. So the world is a lot more connected now because of the internet, because we have access to so much information and we can learn about others. There's also migration. People leave the areas that they are in because they are seeking a better life in some way. So maybe there's a war, maybe there is widespread starvation, and they want to leave so that they can have a better life. So they're going to migrate to other places, and they are also going to carry their cultures with them. So for the most part, once again, if you take sociology with me, we dive deeper into this idea. But if you move to a different country, you're probably gonna keep most of your culture. Like you're gonna still speak the same language, have the same religion, maybe wear the same clothes. And then after a while, you might assimilate, which is where you take on this new country's culture. So if I were to move to Italy, and then after a while I would have to learn Italian and start speaking Italian. Maybe I want to blend in, so I'll start wearing their clothes. Maybe I switch my religion from Christianity to Catholicism to fit in a little bit more. So that would be called assimilation. But you might never get rid of some parts of your culture. Maybe there's a certain food that you're going to continue making, and you'll invite a bunch of your new Italian friends over, and you'll force them to eat hot dogs and hamburgers. And then maybe they'll really enjoy it, and they'll spread that to other people in Italy. And then pretty soon, everyone in Italy is eating hot dogs and hamburgers. So usually cultural ideas will come into an area already, and it might contribute to the culture and kind of change it. Okay, so now we are specifically going to look at population, and we are going to really dive into some numbers. So we're going to have a crossover with math class here. You won't have to do a lot, or really any, but we're going to start looking at demography and just kind of how we are able to understand an area based off of their population. So the world population is sitting at 8 billion people as of 2022, and it's going to continue to grow. 30% of all the land is inhabited, or people live on 30% of the land. And it's predicted that our population will reach 10 billion people by 2050. So we're going to gain another 2 billion within the next 50 years. And then it's going to top off and we're going to start decreasing in population again. I'm not sure how much it would decrease, but basically, social scientists are predicting that 10 billion is kind of the max amount of people that the world can handle at any one time, and then the population just it can't sustain that. So we'll probably see a lot of diseases being spread, and that'll take out a lot of people. Um, Maybe more starvation depending where you live. There's a lot of factors that can go into it. But if you look at other populations of animals, if there is overcrowding, then there are ways that nature just kind of works things out, and you see that population start to decline to a more manageable level, which is really crazy to say about humans. But it is kind of the same idea. Unless people figure out some other solutions, it's very possible that we will reach a peak amount of people and then start declining afterwards. If we look at the history of the world, just within the last 250 years, we've seen a crazy amount of population growth. So before the year 1800, the population really just kind of stayed the same. Like it would grow here and there, and then it would decline because of some disease. There's been diseases around for forever. You had the bubonic plague. There's lots of other plagues, other diseases. But now, since we have modern medicine, we can prevent more people from getting sick. We also know how diseases are spread for the most part, so we have a lot of prevention in place that has allowed people, well, less people to die to start with, and then more people surviving these diseases. So the population of the world doubled between 1800 and 1950. And then it doubled again between 1950 and 2000. So it probably won't double anymore, but we are still going to gain quite a few people within the next 25 years. So with this lesson, we are specifically looking at demography, which is the study of populations. So we're going to use statistics so we can learn about population growth. We want to see how many people are living in a country and if they are growing in population or shrinking, and what reasons there might be for that. So first thing we can look at is the birth rate. These are the number of births per year for every 1,000 people, so we can see how many babies are being born. And then death rate is how many people are dying every year per every 1,000 people. So then if we take the birth rate and death rate, find the difference between it, we are going to find our growth rate. So generally, and I can look it up real quick, but generally we're going to see about a 1% growth rate in Western countries, so like the US and Canada and a lot of European countries. In African countries, some of these Asian countries, and some South American countries, that number is going to be a lot higher, and it could be up to almost like 20%. So it really just depends how quickly that population is growing. We can also add in the amount of people that are migrating into a country or migrating out of. That can also be part of population growth. So death rates have decreased over time. We have better food, it's more nutritious. We have better healthcare. We have more access to medicine and more medicines overall, better technology and better living conditions, and that's allowing people to stay alive for a lot longer. And in a lot of Western countries, we have seen birth rates decrease. So we have less babies being born and people living a lot longer. We really just don't need large families anymore. The thought was having a large family so that you could have a lot of people working on your farm. You needed a lot more hands to do things, and now we just don't need it. And with the state of the world and how expensive everything is, a lot of people are opting to not have kids or only having 1 or 2 children. You can think about your friends or the people in the school. How many siblings do you think most people have? Usually it's around 3 or 4. There's a few families that have a lot, that have like 7, but for the most part, we're gonna probably average it around 3. We also know that developed countries have lower birth and death rates. So developed countries are like the US, Canada, West, or part of Europe. These countries have really been great with industry. They have really good technology. These are kind of like your elite countries in the world. Like they have just really done well throughout the years, and just are superior to others. And this is because in these countries we have good medicine, good living conditions. Most people have access to all basic necessities. So they have access to food, water, shelter, medicine, anything that you need to survive. If we look at developing countries, so third world countries, countries that were kind of left behind and don't have as good of technology, that sort of thing, they are going to have high birth rates and high death rates. And this is because they don't have very good access to healthcare, and the healthcare they do have access to is not very good. So people are still dying, and you have a lot of babies being born because they don't have access to preventative tools that will prevent them from having babies. We can also have zero population growth where the birth rate and death rate are equal. We can look on this map here, and these kind of, I don't know, light blue countries like Greenland. Greenland's actually a part of Denmark. Looks like Finland over here, and then some of these Eastern European countries. They all have a 0% population growth. So your births and your deaths are equal. If you have 5 babies born in a year and 5 people dying, then it equals out. So it's 0. They're not growing and they're not shrinking. Your population does not change and stays the same. And we can also look at something called doubling time, which is the number of years for a population to double in size. So if this happens, your birth rates will be a lot greater than your death rates. For a lot of Asian, African, and Latin American countries, that number is only 50 years. In the previous version of this textbook, that was about 10 years older than this one, that number was actually at 25 years. So it means that within the last 10 years, their population growth and doubling time has slowed down enough that it's only going to double every 50 years rather than 25. And then if we looked at developed countries, their doubling time is more than 300 years. And some of it is due to food and medicine, healthcare access, or it could just be cultural values of not having a large family, or maybe this culture values having a lot of kids. So it really just depends on a few different factors on whether or not a country is growing or shrinking. If there is rapid population growth, there can be some really bad things that happen. So there might be overcrowding, your resources will be used up, so lack of food, lack of water or sanitation, lack of clothing and housing. And this is going to lead to disease. It's going to lead to a lot of homeless people out on the streets. There's going to be hygiene issues, and it's just not good. It's really, really bad. But on the flip side of things, negative population growth can be bad as well, where you don't have enough babies being born to replace the people who are dying. So your old people will retire, and then there's no one to replace them in their job. So that can be really bad for the economy, and then your country might crash because of that. Some countries will actually bring in foreigners to try and prevent their economy from collapsing from lack of workers, but you're bringing in a new culture and this can create tension, so that's not great either. These are called population pyramids. So this one is rapid growth. So you have your 80-year-olds at the top here, 75, 70-year-olds, and there's not that many of them. But if you look at the young kids, 0 to 10, those groups of children are a lot bigger than your older group. So you have a lot more people coming into the world than going out, so you get a pretty typical pyramid or triangle here. If we look at the US, where we have just like a 1% population growth, it's kind of evened out. You have an older population here that's fairly small, but then you have pretty evened out generations throughout the year. So we're more of a rectangle than a triangle. And you can see at one point it would have been a triangle, but we've really evened out since then. And then if we look at Germany, they have negative growth, so they are just an upside down triangle. Your older populations have more people than the younger groups. So Germany in a few years are going to have issues with replacing the older people who are retiring. And these younger people are going to have quite a bit of burden trying to take on those roles. And then population distribution is just where people are settling, and there's lots of different factors for that. There's a reason why people settle in specific places. Generally, it's related to our physical geography. So you can't really live on top of a mountain peak. Some you can, but for the most part you're not going to. Same with deserts. You're probably not going to live in the desert. Not saying it's impossible, not saying that people don't, but generally you're not going to see people living there. We see people settle in areas that have fertile soil, a mild climate, and water. So if we look at our area, there is one very specific feature that goes through our town, and that is a river. So we have ready access to water. If we look at Rapid City, think about it for a second. Is there a body of water that goes through Rapid? There is. There is Rapid Creek. You can look at Sioux Falls, same thing. There's a river that flows through there. If you look at Pierre, same thing. There's a river that flows through there. My hometown is Phillip. There's a river that flows straight through town. So any town that you go to, odds are there's going to be a river flowing right through it. And that's because when this area was first settled, people needed access to water. So they're going to set up a house, set up a town right next to the water. It gets a little bit different in different places, depending on how much water there is, if they do have rivers that flow through. Some areas have underground water or wells that they can tap into, so you might not see a river on the surface, but there might be water below the surface. If we look at the world, we see that the continents of Europe and Asia are the most densely populated, meaning that there is a lot of people packed into a small area. And Asia has 60% of all of the population in the world just within that continent. And most people are going to live in urban areas. Urban is just another word for a town or a city. And we really see this in Europe, North America, South America, and Australia. If we look at this map very quickly, your darker colors, so your dark blue and almost navy blue, some black, those are going to be more densely populated, and this is a map of all the counties in the US. And then the lighter your colors, so this kind of light tan cream color, means less people. So if we look at South Dakota, you can see we have one dark blue county, we have kind of a dark green county, and then the rest are a mix between green and yellow. So that tells us that we only have one county that has a lot of people in it. We have another county over here, which is where Rapid is. That's a little bit more populated. That dark blue one is Minnehaha County, which is where Sioux Falls is. And then we have one white county, and that is Harding County. There is kind of just one town or one major town there, and that's Buffalo, and I think their population is only 300. So not a lot of people live there. No surprise that Wyoming, very few people live there. Same with Nevada. Nevada is mainly a desert, except for this county, which is going to be where Las Vegas is, and then Reno is over here. One other thing that you might notice on this map, your west coast is pretty highly populated, and your east coast is really highly populated. So if we look at the east coast, people originally came from England or from France, from whatever European country, and they settled on this western coast, or sorry, eastern coast. And hopefully when you took 8th grade American history last year, you learned that that was where the original colonies were. And then over time, more people came into the US, and then they slowly moved farther and farther west. And if you look at this section where there's not a lot of people, this is the Great Plains. And it's not necessarily the best environment. We have really cold winters, really hot summers. It can be really, really dry. There's a lot of droughts. But if you keep going farther west, you're on the coast, and now you have people coming from Asia over to this coast and settling here. Okay, and then population density. We are going to use this one a lot. So this is looking at how crowded or how many people live in a specific area. So specifically, we are going to take the population of, let's say, a state. So if we take the state of South Dakota, we're going to take our population, which should be somewhere around 900,000, and we're going to take the amount of square miles of land that we have, and I don't know what that number is, and we are going to divide those, and that will give us our population density. So ours is 11.5 square miles. Or sorry, 11.5 people per square mile. If we look at this map, we can see a little bit more here. So the darker the green, the less people, and then all the way up to red, which has a lot more people. So once again, Harding County here, barely anyone. They have less than one person per square mile. If we look at these red ones, you can tell exactly where our cities are. So here is Rapid, here is Sioux Falls, you have Vermilion down here, somewhere in there. And then you can kind of see some of these other bigger cities like Watertown and Aberdeen are up here. And then you have us. Not a whole lot of people here. So this green is probably closest to this one. So we have somewhere between 1 and 10 people per square mile for our county. Every country is going to have a different population density, and this just helps us understand how many people are living on the land and if it's really inhabited or not. Like, do they have a lot of people living on a small area, or are there a few people living on a big area? So Canada, for example, has a low population density. They have about 10 people per square mile. And this is a little bit easier for them. It's less crowded. You can buy a bunch of land. You can choose to live in a city or a rural area. Versus a country like Bangladesh, that has a high population density. Theirs is 3,362 people per square mile, where they have major issues with overcrowding, which puts a strain on their resources. When you have that, everything is going to go up in cost. Your house is going to cost a lot of money, and it's just going to be a lot harder to do things. And then we can have a country that has whatever for a population and compare it to another country with the same population, but they can have completely different population densities. So for example, you have Cuba, which is an island in the Caribbean, and Somalia, which is a country in Africa. They both have 11.1 million people. However, Somalia has a lot more land than Cuba. So their population density is less. They're less dense. They have 46 people per square mile, whereas Cuba, which is an island, has 261 people per square mile. We can also look at population distribution. Egypt is a great example of this. So their population density is 232 people per square mile. However, most of their country is desert. So if we look on this map here, this is Egypt, all of this, but we have the Nile River flowing through here, and you can see where all the people live. They're not living out in the desert, they are living along all the water sources. So they're living along the Nile River, they're living along the Mediterranean Sea, and they're living along the Red Sea. So even though they have all this land, it's not really inhabitable. So their population density might be 232 people per square mile. But if we just took the land that people are living on in Egypt, it would be about 7,501 people per square mile. So that kind of changes your perspective on things. And then we also have population movement. So people like to move from place to place. They might move from city to city, city to suburbs, a rural area to a city. Right now we see a lot of people moving to cities in general, and this is called urbanization. So people are moving to cities because they believe there are better jobs out there, they have a better chance at making money, and it really depends on what city you move to, because some cities are already overcrowded, they already have issues with not enough jobs. So people get to the cities and they find out that they are worse off or no better than they were before. And other times it might pay off. Maybe you will live a better life. It just really depends. We know that half of the world lives in cities, and Mexico City is a really good example of urbanization. So in 1960, their population was 5 million. In 2016, it was 22 million. So just within about 56 years, they grew a lot in population. We also know that 1/3 of all people living in Argentina live in Buenos Aires, which is their biggest city. So then we have two different types of migration. We have emigration and immigration. I know we've all heard of immigration. We all know what that one is, where you leave a country and move to a new one, or you have someone moving from a different country into your country. And this can be for a lot of different reasons. You could be looking for a better life. Maybe there was a war or famine that forced you to leave. It just kind of depends on situation by situation. And we have push and pull factors. So a push factor is the reason why someone is leaving their country. They are being pushed out of it. And a pull factor is something that brings them in. So if we look at someone leaving Mexico to come to the US, we know in Mexico, push factors would include maybe drought, maybe famine, potentially the drug cartels could cause a lot of violence and force someone out. And if we look at the US, the pull factor would be, well, you don't have violence like that, you have lots of job opportunities, and maybe the climate is a little bit more mild, maybe you have access to food. So people would leave and come here instead. So if we talk about emigration, it is technically the same idea as immigration. However, it depends on your perspective. So if we have someone leaving Mexico coming into the US, they are an immigrant to us. If my best friend were to leave the US and go to Canada, I would call her an emigrant. So, someone who leaves the US and goes to Canada is an emigrant to other Americans. So, if an American leaves and goes somewhere else, we say that they emigrated. So, they left the US. It's really just dependent on perspective and your relation to that person. So same thing, if I have someone from France who moved to England and I am a French citizen, I would say that my best friend, who is also French, emigrated to England. So it depends if it is a person leaving your country and they were also a citizen of your country, then they emigrate. But if it's someone coming from a different country other than yours, then they are an immigrant. All right, so now we're going to move on to political geography. So we are looking at the different types of government. When we are looking at the different types, we can ask two questions, or I guess one question here. And it is who governs, which means leads, the state, which is another word for country. So who is leading our country? And we can break it into three main types of governments. So the first one is an autocracy. I know this looks like it should be said autocracy, but it's an autocracy. And this is just being ruled by one person. So this is like a dictatorship where you have one crazy authoritarian ruler. So North Korea is a great example of that with Kim Jong-un. Or you could have a monarchy, which is where you have a king or a queen ruling, and the United Kingdom is a good example of that. And then you have an oligarchy, and this is where you have several people ruling. So it might just be two people, it could be three people, it could be a whole class of people. And usually this group will get their power from wealth or from money. Hopefully you'll learn in world history next year that if you have money, you have power. That's a very common theme seen throughout the history of the world. They might also get their power from the military, so they might violently overthrow a government. It could just be based off of social class, but once again, that kind of ties into wealth. Or it could be a combination of all of those things. So we don't really have any oligarchies in the world today. This was kind of an old form of a government. And a good example of that would be the aristocracy. So this is a social class of people who are very wealthy, and they rule with their money. Because they have money, they have power, and they can control all the other poorer classes of people. And this was commonly seen in a lot of the Chinese dynasties from way, way, way back. Another example of an oligarchy would be in ancient Rome. You had the first triumvirate, which was it was three men who ruled, and then you had the second triumvirate, which is another group of three men, and they just ruled ancient Rome. They worked together. And then I usually remember oligarchy because I always think of a group of old men ruling. So oligarchy has OL like old does. That's the trick I use. It might not make any sense to you, but it makes sense in my brain. We can also have a theocracy. This is where religion makes the rules. So you're still going to have government officials. You might still have not necessarily a king or a queen. You could, but you have an official who is being led by their religion. They might be led by God, they might be led by Allah, some form of divine power. And your best example of this would be in the Middle East. A lot of those countries are Islamic, so Islam is the religion. And they have something called Sharia law. And basically, their religion creates their laws. So their religion says that women can't go to school or girls can't go to school. So if you're a girl and you're caught going to school, you are going to have to pay a consequence for that. You might have to go to jail, they might cut off a finger, like there is some form of punishment, and it's directly tied to their religion. So if you break a religious rule, then you break like an actual government enforceable rule. There's not many other types of theocracies in the world today. You are really going to only see them in the Middle East. And then there's a democracy. So democracy, the word, comes from ancient Greece, and it means rule by the people. And there are two different types of democracies. The first is a direct democracy, where all people have a direct vote. This was seen in ancient Athens. So they would elect their government leaders through kind of a crazy process where they would take a broken piece of pottery and vote on whether or not to keep a leader or ostracize them. Uh, and then someone would count up all those votes, and there's your answer. So each person gets to directly vote on whether or not to do something. In the US, we have a representative democracy. So most Americans we know are not informed enough to make the best decisions when electing officials or voting for laws. So instead of giving each American that power, we vote for a representative who is going to represent our area, and they are then going to make our laws and vote on things on our behalf. That being said, they should still listen to us. They should get input from their people and then do what their people want them to for the most part. So we see representative democracies in the US and France and a lot of other countries. And most countries in the world are slowly shifting towards a democracy. So, government is part of culture, but it can also help dictate what countries are where or why we have certain borders. So we might have geographic boundaries that are going to form a country or form a state. So for example, the Mississippi River is the border for quite a few states. It starts in Minnesota and then all the way down to Louisiana. It actually forms the border of most of the states that it goes through. Another example here is this river, and it looks like two rivers that flows between Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. So it just forms that natural boundary. We also know that government can help people get the goods and services they need. Governments can also help build roads. They can build buildings, bridges, and parks. This is called infrastructure. A good example in our area is that the Rapid City Airport, it's pretty small, and they are going under construction right now, and they're actually planning for like 30 years in the future. We know that the population of Rapid City is increasing, so they are planning on that. So they might not need, I want to say they're building like 5 more gates or something. So they might not need those gates now, but they know they will in the future. So they are just going to build those gates now to prepare for them. And we can also have natural boundaries, which, like I said, it's like a river here. It could be mountains, something that's easy to identify and you can't move it. Everyone just kind of agrees like, oh yeah, like that's the boundary. And then there's cultural boundaries, which are decided by the government, and this might divide two cultures. A great example of this is in India. Most people practiced Hinduism, but Muslims, people who practice Islam, came over and converted a bunch of people to Islam, and eventually Pakistan split off from India because the majority of people living there wanted to be Muslim and they wanted to make their own rules and laws that reflected their religion. So they split off. So now you have two different cultures that form two different countries because of their differences. And then geometric boundaries. I always think of geometry because geometry has shapes. So this is neither political or geographic landforms. It's not a cultural divide. It's not a natural boundary. It's just a straight line. So if we look at Wyoming, just straight lines. Like that's not a river. It's not mountains. It's nothing. It's just because our government was like, we need to divide up this land into states, and this is what we got. Even South Dakota, we are very square for most of our state. We have a little notch over here that was taken out by Minnesota, but then we took out some other areas here, and that's because of I believe the Missouri River flowing through there. There's also other countries in the world, so both or all three, Libya, Egypt, and Algeria, are all located in North Africa, and they're all very square. It's just how they were created and formed, and everyone was like, yeah, just draw a square. Boundaries can change over time, especially these geometric ones, because it's just the government, it's just a group of people that are like, yeah, those look good for boundaries. So they can change. If there's a war or if they're fighting over resources, they might move those lines to reflect the change in politics. So now we have different economic systems. So this is how we get money. It's how we just kind of live our lives. So the first one we have is a traditional economy. We don't see very many of these in the world anymore. And these are really your just kind of basic economies. You're probably not going to have a currency or money that you're exchanging. You might be bartering for things. So if I am really good at making bread and I need some eggs, I'm going to trade a loaf of bread for a dozen eggs. And you just kind of live your life in that way. So everything is just very basic, and it's all based off of your customs. An example would be the Inuit or Eskimo people of Canada. They, in the past, for survival, all the men would go out and hunt seals, and any food that they brought back would be shared with the entire village. It wouldn't just be shared with the hunter's family. And then kind of that same system of like, well, you all work together to help each other. So you brought the seal, I'm going to use the fur from the seal to make clothing, and then you're just going to share with everyone. And traditional economies, even if they are introduced to more advanced technology, they usually don't change very fast. They're going to kind of shy away from that and stick to how they've always done things. A market economy is literally like going to a market. You see a bunch of vendors selling items and you're able to go and buy whatever you want as long as you have that money, and vendors can sell whatever they want. So a market economy is where you have just individual people, you might have companies, and they get to decide what to make. So shoppers are going to choose what to buy, and businesses will make the items that they think shoppers want. The basic idea behind this is called free enterprise. So people can choose what jobs they have, and there's no restrictions. There's no one telling them no. And this is also part of capitalism. So this is where the government is extremely hands-off of businesses. They're not going to regulate them. They're just going to let the businesses do their thing, and prices should stay low because of competition. You are always going to buy the item that's cheaper. So maybe there are two fruit stands, both are selling oranges. One is selling oranges for 50 cents a piece and the other one is selling them for 45 cents a piece. Everyone is going to go to that stand that's selling them for 45 cents, which is then going to cause the other stand to drop their prices as well. So they are competing to get the most sales. So that's how prices stay low in a true pure capitalist economic system. So there aren't really any pure capitalist societies or pure market economies. Instead, most countries will be a mixed economy. So this is where the government is going to step in and say, okay, for the most part, you can do what you want, but we need to make sure that people are being kept safe. We want to make sure that your oranges aren't rotten, or you aren't injecting some weird poison into them. So the government's going to step in and regulate certain things. So they still want the competition there to make sure that prices are kept low, but they might step in and just kind of monitor the businesses. And then a command economy. This is where the government has complete control over everything. So they are going to own and direct something called the means of production. So the means of production are just the way that we are producing or making things. So this is going to involve land, labor, capital. Capital is made up of money, factories, machinery, and then you have business managers. But the government gets to decide everything. They get to decide what is being made and who gets what's being made and how much they're making. The main idea is that everyone gets an equal share. However, that rarely happens. There are no pure societies like this. There is always greed and someone taking advantage of someone else. So it's a great idea, but in practice it just doesn't work. The two other systems that are linked to a command economy are socialism and communism. So socialism is where the government is going to own some of the means of production, and then some of it is going to be up to the people. But in socialist societies, they really believe in everyone working towards the good of everyone else. Like, you are trying to help each other as much as possible. And then communism, the government is going to own everything, all of the means of production, and the government just controls everything. So very, very strict. We usually see those in dictatorships, and they don't work very well. So there are lots of natural resources in the world. Some countries have a lot of oil, others don't have any. Some countries might have a lot of gold, other countries have a little bit. So these resources are just spread out, concentrated in some areas versus others. So countries are going to specialize in making items that are best suited to their resources. So let's say in the US, if you are in a forested area, they might focus a lot on cutting down trees and then using those trees to make lumber to build homes or buildings, and then they might ship it all over that country or all over the world. Nowadays, a lot of developed countries are focusing on technology rather than manufacturing. We have better technology, which means we don't need as many humans to do things. So that has caused people to work in service industries now, and very few are working in manufacturing. Not a lot of factory workers in the US. And we have a higher standard of living compared to other places in the world. We might also have newly industrialized countries. So these countries recently switched from agricultural ways to now manufacturing and having factories and making things. And when this happens, there are some small improvements in society. Great examples are Mexico, Malaysia, and Turkey. And then you have less developed countries. These are generally found in Africa, Asia, Latin America. And agriculture is the biggest activity, the biggest thing happening in their economies. Not a lot of factories or any factories. Some countries are so poorly developed that they are going to use subsistence farming, which is where you grow enough food for your family and that's it. So basically a garden in the backyard, enough to get your family through, but you're not trying to sell your food and make money off of it. And in these countries, people will remain poor because you need economic development to make more money. And if that's not happening, then people aren't making more money. Okay, and then quickly, the last thing we'll talk about is urban geography. So, surprisingly, there is a plan to cities. So, we have something called urban sprawl. So, this is where you have a city and people are slowly moving out of the city and creating suburbs. So, we know that people are moving into cities. They're leaving rural areas, moving into cities. 82% of Americans live in cities. More than 2/3 of Europeans, Russians, Japanese, and Australians live in cities. And this is because we can be more connected to other people when we live in cities. If we need to go to the store, it's only a few minutes away versus if I live on a farm that is an hour from the store, like it's going to be a lot harder to do things. So people move to cities because you have availability of things. You have jobs, you have stores, you have all these things at your disposal that are within a, let's say, 10-minute walk. Versus living in a rural area, you don't have that. So if we look at the 1900s, only 1 in 10 people actually lived in cities. That number increased to 5 in 10 by 2018, and allegedly now it is 6 in 10. And cities do serve a purpose. We see a lot of manufacturing happening. There might be service centers, healthcare, and centers of culture and creativity. So anything that is happening within our culture is probably going to take place in a big city. If we have a large population, that means you have a lot of workers, so then these areas can support a lot of industries. You might have several factories, you have several different types of businesses, and you have a lot of people buying and selling goods or selling services. We talked about overpopulation and how bad that can be. It can lead to crime, poverty, conflict, pollution, some really bad stuff happens. And then if we look at a big city, we are generally talking about the metropolitan area. So you have a central city and then surrounding suburbs or surrounding smaller cities. So Denver is a great example of this. So Denver itself is a city here, but then you have all of these other cities outlying it. So you have Aurora and Lakewood and Littleton and Centennial, you have Boulder, you have Colorado Springs. Like all these cities are basically connected into one, and we call it the Denver metropolitan area. So Denver itself isn't that big, but if you start adding in all the people that live on the outskirts of Denver, it's huge. And then lastly, when we have a lot of people moving into cities very quickly, we get issues. So there's pollution, services are going to be strained, you're not going to have enough electricity, you're going to need more schools, more hospitals, more doctors, better transportation, you're going to have sanitation issues, and then you need more police, more security. People are being forced out of rural areas because of climate change or because of over farming. So they are moving to cities to try and find jobs. But when they get to the cities, there's not enough jobs there, which means that they are going to have to take a job that barely supports them, or maybe they'll end up homeless and on the street, which can lead to poverty. And this is a common theme that we see throughout the world. Cities all over the world are going to have poor housing, homelessness, pollution, addiction, crime, gang violence, and the list can go on. There's a lot of issues that happen in bigger cities just because you have so many people living in such a small area. We're going to see a lot of negative things result from that.